It's my very pleasurable duty to introduce our speaker today, Shri Bharat Chandrasekharan ji. So, children, you should know that Bharat ji lives in Chennai. He will be sharing with us his lot of insights. So, it's his hobby that he travels quite a lot. He goes to different places, villages, cities, towns of especially Tamil Nadu, and photography is his hobby. So he has taken a lot of pictures, and he's a scholar. So he studies the architecture, history, tradition of the dharma in general, but temples in particular. And within that, today he is going to focus on the temples of Tamil Nadu. So you have seen in our classes in last 8 or 9 weeks how dharma plays a central role in the entire life of Bharata. And for dharma to play that central role, temple is the extremely important place from where that dharma emanates in a way. So Bharatji by background is an engineer from BITS Pilani, which is a very respected engineering institute in India. And he did his management graduation from Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. And Bharatji has more than 2 decades of experience, and he currently heads the supply chain management for one of the India's largest automotive aftermarket companies. So as I said, in his free time, he travels, he studies, he speaks, he writes, and one of his books is just going to hit the stand very soon, which he's co-authoring about the temples of South India, especially Pallava and Chalukya temples. So it's also one of my honors to call Bharat ji a friend. He has been very kind to me and to Samskara Foundation by his advices that he has been continuously giving. So with that, Bharat ji, welcome to the program. Thank you very much for coming and taking time out of your busy schedule to speak to
Thank you very much, Sarvesh ji, for considering me worthy enough to come here. And I'm also thankful to the children for that amazing rendition at the beginning. So you all invited me to this, and you've given me a wonderful introduction. I should also start with a shloka. There is a tradition where any teacher or guru and his status in the life of a student is kind of expressed very clearly in a shloka that is followed both in the Shaiva and the Vaishnava sampradayas. The Vaishnava sampradaya varies a little bit, but the essential component is the same. Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. What it starts with is by saying the lineage of the Guru, the one who teaches you, goes all the way up to Sadashiva, starts with him, and from there comes Shankaracharya, and let him continue as my Guru, and let the parampara of the Guru continue, so that we continue learning continuously from the teachings that the Guru imparts to us. The Vaishnavas have a kind of a variation where they start with Vishnu Samarambham, and it goes to Vyasa, or Narayana Samarambham, and it goes to Vyasa Madhyamam, and so on. But the essential position of the Guru to teach, and the stature of the student to learn from him has been a very important element of our culture. And I'm very grateful to Sarvesh ji for inviting me here, and I think he's going to be a phenomenal teacher to you, and I hope you learn a lot of things from him. I'm very excited to talk to you. At the same time, it's also a challenge. You're young people. These kind of talks I've given to probably people of your fathers or your mother's age group. But today I will try to impart the same concepts and knowledge today to you. We're going to talk about temples. Temples have many aspects to them. Obviously, they are religious, right? We go there to pray to our gods, but there are also other angles to them. They have a lot of social angles. They have a lot of economic angles. So many businesses and so many social customs depend on them. Obviously, culture, art, architecture are the first things that you see when you go to a temple, particularly ancient temples. The representation of our religion through stone and paint is obviously very obvious. Finally, there are also kingdoms that built them. So there are political angles to these temples. Why did the kings build them? And how did they continue to, take care of these temples and make sure that they became part of society is another aspect to it. Much against what Sarveshji must have told you, I am neither a history buff nor an expert. As he told you, my job takes me to many cities in Tamil Nadu because as part of supply chain, I have to go visit customers, retailers. My warehouses are in the hinterlands of Tamil Nadu. And whenever I go there, every town, every small town has a temple. Many of these temples are very ancient. When I'm talking ancient, Tamil Nadu probably has the largest number of more than 1,000-year-old temples. Tamil Nadu is supposed to have about 35 to 40,000 temples. That's quite a number of temples. And among them, if not a few hundreds, at least a few thousands will be ancient temples that are 800, 900, 1,000, 1,200 years old. Really built by our ancestors. They've been left there as a legacy, and the legacy is continued to be maintained by the current population that resides there. And when you go to these temples, there is obviously, the element of bhakti. You go and stand in front of the deity, pray to the deity for whatever you wish to ask for. But it's not just for that. The temples, particularly the ancient ones, have many elements to them that you may not know. You come to the outside wall and you see a form of Shiva or Vishnu or Ganesha or whatever that you've never known about. There are so many various forms of the deity that are represented. There could be an inscription on the walls, which the king who built the temple etched on it, and and it captures something that the king wanted to say, either about the temple or about his administration or about the society of those times. There are various things that he has inscribed there. So the temples themselves become a kind of a history book. And lastly, there are always the festivals. Every temple in Tamil Nadu has always an utsav or an utsavam, as we call it. At least one, if not more, that are celebrated in and around the temple, where the entire village or town or community gets involved. And I'll show you some really amazing videos of such festivals. So why am I telling you all this? There are temples we go and pray, but there are so many other elements. Why am I telling you all this? The reason I'm telling you is I would like to encourage you to have a little bit of inquiry and little bit of questioning of why this temple is where it is, what is its purpose, who built it, what can we learn from it? Because there is so much to be learned from history. At the end of the day, we are all here because of things that our ancestors did. And in this particular situation, wherever we are, these are all an outcome of all the historical happenings that have happened in the past. So it is obviously very important to learn why we are here so that we are ready for the future. One, to learn from it and to improve. Second, to also learn from mistakes and improve. Third, to know who we are. What is our place in the world? So these elements are very nicely brought out when we start exploring these temples. So without much, taking much more time, I will jump into the presentation. As with everything, there is an element of theory that you need to go through. And after the theory portion, we'll also see a lot of pictures, a lot of videos. So bear with me. Whenever you don't understand something, please immediately unmute and ask me the question. I will try to explain the terms that I'm using in this presentation beforehand so that you know what I'm talking about. So let me put up the presentation and share it with you. Also, what I'm going to do is kind of switch off my video. I sometimes have some bandwidth problems. So I don't want that to hinder what we are going through. Okay, so this is what we are going to be talking about, the temples of Tamil Nadu. And what we will do is go through a kind of structure by which you should be able to understand why these temples hold a kind of a position in our society. So what we will do is we'll go through and understand, was temple worship always there? If not, how did our society adopt temple worship? How did it develop architecturally? Temples have, as I told you, a different dimension to them. They also became part of local administration and everyday life. And we will go through this through 3 of the 4 major kingdoms that ruled ancient and medieval Tamil Nadu. The Pallavas, the Cholas, the Pandyas, and the Cheras. In fact, the Cholas, Pandyas, and Cheras are the 3 major kingdoms of Tamil Nadu, which are mentioned in very ancient literature of Tamil Nadu, but we also have the Pallavas. So before we go into these aspects, I want to understand from you a few things. You would have all read about Mahabharata, Ramayana. I'm assuming most of you know the story of it, the prime characters. So can you tell me any temples that are mentioned where maybe Yudhishthira went, or maybe Bhima went, or maybe Rama went? Is there anything mentioned in these texts about temples? I'm curious to know if you have any idea of temples within these epics, because these epics are very important for us Hindus. They form a very strong basis of our culture. Anybody?
I know one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Examples is when Sita went to the Devi temple before her wedding.
So Sita went to a Devi temple before her wedding. Excellent.
Kashi.
Anyone else?
Kashi.
Kashi was there, but was Kashi a temple mentioned in Mahabharata or Ramayana?
There was a temple in Kashi.
There is a temple in Kashi, right?
Didn't Rukmini go to a Devi temple?
Rukmini went to a Devi temple before, and just as she was coming out of the temple, Krishna abducts her, right?
Yeah.
Arjun went to the Somnath temple.
Arjun went to the Somnath temple.
Rama and Sita went to Srisailam.
Rama and Sita went to Srisailam. Wow. I don't know about this, but it's very interesting to know.
They went to Rameshwaram
Before war.
They went to Rameshwaram. Rameshwaram is where he built the bridge and they crossed over. Good. So you've given me a whole list of things to where you've said these are the temples that were mentioned. Perhaps not in the original text, but at least in some version of the Mahabharata and Ramayana. What about the Vedas? Are there any temples mentioned in the Vedas?
No.
No.
I think the Sri Rangam temple is mentioned in the Vedas.
Well, not really, but we'll come to the Sri Rangam temple. It's a very interesting point that you bring up. But it's a very important temple. So we'll cover Sri Rangam temple as well. Anyone else? So somebody said no, and somebody said Sri Rangam temple. So let's explore this a little bit, right? So were there temples in Mahabharata, Ramayana? What about the Vedas? We come to Ramayana and Mahabharata a little later. Or let's start with it actually. So in the great epics, actually Yudhishthira, when he leaves with his brothers, you know, for the 12-year exile, as Arjuna goes off to acquire divine weapons, all the Pandavas are advised by the elders and told to go and visit several Tirtha Stalas. These Tirtha Stalas are places of great religious significance. Why are they of religious significance? Either a great yagna was performed here, or a divine celestial event took place there. Could be a war, could be one of the forms of the gods appeared there, could be various reasons. And the place itself is sanctified due to the presence of that divinity which descended there. And Yudhishthira and the Pandavas go to these places, and the way it is described in the book is divinity descends there and resides whenever they are asked to come by saints and sages, and they are worshipped then and there. But these were very different yugas. All of you will be knowing that you know, our timelines are divided into 4 yugas, and each of those yugas form a kalpa, and so on and so forth. So yuga is the time period, and the 4 different time periods are Treta Yuga or Satya Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, and then you have Kali Yuga. We are obviously in Kali Yuga, but at the end of the day, the temple is still a living entity. And the living entity with the divinity which has been brought in and placed in the temple. So we always had a concept of a place where we would go to pray to our gods, and that could either be these Tirtha Stalas, or there is a temple which we have started establishing, particularly in Kali Yuga. A lot of our history is shrouded and lost in time, but one thing is clear. The term called Chaitya appears in the Vedas, and it is very synonymous with temples. Chaitya itself means piling up of bricks. Our yagnas are called Agni Chayana, which means building up of the fire altar, and they are typically built up with bricks. So this is in line with the yagnas where the altar is piled up with big bricks. So the initial Chaityas that are mentioned in the Vedas were probably just simple brick constructions with a deity within. They are always very closely associated with the yagnas, because the Vedas are full of rituals that are performed to achieve a particular goal. In the Mahabharata and Ramayana, in the originals, there are several local variations. A lot of temples are mentioned. So these temples are basically where Yudhishthira is directed to visit a temple on top of a hill. He's also asked to go to temples by Narmada's riverbank. And what is explained in these temples is most of these temples are found next to yupas. Yupas are basically sacrificial posts that are installed when a yagna is done. So obviously, you know, a yagna took place and a temple has been constructed because some divinity came there, and now we have given it a kind of a permanent residence. Similarly, Ramayana mentions a shrine in Lanka. Citizens of Ayodhya are said to have painted the entrances of the temples when the coronation of Rama was announced. And then we will come to what one of you spoke about, the largest living temple in the world. When I say living temple, whenever I say living temple, what I mean is a temple where prayers are still held today. The largest temple complex in the world is actually not in India. It is in Cambodia. It's called Angkor Wat. That's the largest temple complex in the world today, Hindu temple complex in the world today. The largest living temple complex in the world today is in India, and it's in Tamil Nadu, and it is the Srirangam temple. I'm giving you a view of the Srirangam temple. What you see in the first picture, the third Gopuram, or the entrance of the temple, is the tallest entrance in the world. It's, I think, if I'm not wrong, about 260 or 270 feet tall. And then you kind of come into the temple. It's a huge temple. It's the largest living temple in India. And the temple inside has where the main deity, which is a reclining form of Vishnu, is kept. The structure on top of it is called the Vimana, or what you might know as the Shikhara. So what you see on the right-hand side is the golden Vimana, or the Shikhara. You also see a form of Vishnu there. That form is called Paravasudeva. So this Vimana that you're seeing, according to our legends, was a Vimana which emerged out of Samudra Manthan, and it went off to the heavens and it was brought to earth by Ikshvaku. Ikshvaku is the predecessor of Rama. In fact, Rama is born in the Ikshvaku clan. And at some point in the Ramayana, Vibhishana is carrying this Vimana to Sri Lanka, but it refuses to move beyond Trichy and becomes the Srirangam temple. Therefore, the Srirangam temple is actually considered Kuladevata of Lord Rama himself. When the Ram Mandir, they had the ceremony recently, a lot of material was also sent from the Srirangam temple. The Archakas of the temple actually made a video and said, we are the Kuladevata of Lord Rama and this is what we are sending across. So, somewhere in its inclusive nature of our religion, and moving with the changing yugas, we evolved from or alongside a Vedic civilization where rituals and yagnas were done for the person who sponsored them, to a practice of worshipping an installed deity within a structure which was for the whole community, for the whole society. After all, when you go to a temple, the Archaka is not Archaka is performing worship for everybody who's present there. The fruits or the results of that worship also go to those who are present there and not to the Archaka. So, from this yagna, which is specifically performed for a purpose, alongside develop this temple structure so that Hindus can continue to go and worship there and as a society accrue the results of worshipping to a deity. So the thing that you have to keep in mind is we have always been a very thoughtful and meticulous lot. We are actually a very knowledge-oriented society. Our approach is very holistic and nothing stands alone in itself. Everything is connected to everything else, and you will also see this as we go ahead. Because once this construction begins, what happens is we start developing a lot of texts and a lot of processes to make sure that these temples are constructed according to very specified rules. How to install the idol inside, what is the dimension of the temple, what are the mantras to be read to install the deity, so on and so forth. In fact, even Buddhist and Jain texts talk about temples of Devi, of Kumara, of Rudra. So it is believed that, and I'm assuming all of you know what BCE and CE is. BCE is before the current era and CE is the current era. We are in the current era. We are in the year 2020 of the current era. Whatever was prior to zero year of the current era is BCE. So it's believed that by around 6th century BCE, temples were widely present in the Gangetic plains. The golden period of the Guptas saw a huge rise in temple constructions. So once we started constructing temples, we also said we will write a lot of books on how these temples should be built, because a temple cannot be built just like that. So texts like Mayamata, Manasara, Shilpasara, Shilpa Prakasha in Odisha, Prasada Mandana in Rajasthan, Ishana Shiva Gurudeva Paddhati in South and Central India. All these texts started getting written and they are all formal parts of what is called Vastu Shastra, or the science of building. So in these texts, what you see is temples are supposed to be of three types: the Nagara style, the Dravida style, and the Vesara style. Nagara and Vesara styles are more towards the north of the country. Dravida style is what is followed in the south of the country. All of these styles are built on common principles, but there are variations in style. For example, a Nagara temple Shikhara will be kind of oblong or circular, whereas a Dravida style Shikhara will be pyramidal in structure. So there are these kind of differences, but most of the elements are common. There will always be a Garbhagriha in which the deity is installed. The Vimana or the Shikhara will be on top. Then you'll have various kinds of mandapas, which we will see. So let's jump into the temples of Dravida. Dravidian architecture, which developed in the south, was actually pioneered by two kingdoms, the Pallavas and the Chalukyas. Pallavas ruled in the Tamil Nadu side, and Chalukyas ruled in the Karnataka and went into Maharashtra. So over time, some of them also came into Andhra and so on and so forth. So Pallavas were in Tamil Nadu, and Chalukyas, these were the early kingdoms which started temple construction as a rigor, as an art, as a science. So K.R. Srinivasan has noted about how these two kingdoms, he was the former deputy director of ASI, which is the Archaeological Society of India. And he says the Gangas, the Muttarayars, the early Cholas, later Cholas, Pandyas, Vijayanagara rulers, and even the provincial Nayakas continued the Pallava tradition. Whereas the Rashtrakutas, the Telugu Cholas, later Chalukyas, Kakatiyas, Hoysalas continued the Chalukya tradition of temple building. Right? So, like I was saying, there is a lot of principle involved in temple construction. There are a lot of practices. I just want to do 2-3 slides about theory, and then we will get into the pictures. So temples are built in South India on the basis of what is called Agama Shastras. So you must be wondering, what is this new term being introduced? So Agama is literally translates to that which has come down, or Agama is actually a synonym for tradition. The Agamas are also texts which have been written. They deal with philosophies, worship procedures, practices, temple construction methods, how to install a deity, how to worship a deity, what is the daily puja vidhi, so on and so forth. They are an obvious extension of the Vedas. So there is a famous quote which says, if Veda is the cow, then Agama is the milk. These Agama Shastras deal completely with architecture and rituals of the temples for sure. The deity, the architecture, the rituals, etc. are elaborated in them. One thing you have to note is that the deity, the architecture and rituals are not distinct from one another in the Agamas, because the temple is kind of a mini representation of the cosmos itself. The deity, in fact, dictates the architecture. You can't just build a temple and say, and then decide later whether you're going to install a Ganesha or a Shiva or a Vishnu there. Depending on who you want to install, the structure comes up. They're also very clear in terms of the layout, location, what direction the temple should be, what material to use, how will ventilation be, how can I bring natural lighting into the temple, what kind of artificial lighting I should use. Do I plant trees? Do I not plant trees? If I plant trees, which tree to plant? And also a very step-by-step process that you're seeing on the slide. First, the location is identified. Then the material to build the temple is identified. Wherever the location is identified, they actually grow corn and feed the cows with that corn as a distinct step of temple construction. Then they do Vastu Puja. Then they remove all the undesired elements. Then they finally lay the first stone. And this Adhyashtaka ritual was what Modi ji went and performed in Ayodhya, where the first stone was laid, and then construction begins. Finally, the construction also culminates where the on top of the temple, the top stone is placed. With that, it is closed, and then you finally put the kalasha on top at the place of the main deity. The main deity is installed, and then you, through mantras, bring the god himself into that particular deity, and pratishtha is done. With that, the temple becomes alive. So there are various steps which have been listed out, and each of these is followed in any temple that is constructed or was constructed.
The Sri Rangam temple was so tall. How did they manage to put the first?
I will show you taller temples, and we will have a discussion around that. Very good question. I will show you even larger temples, and you'll have a fun time trying to figure out how they actually built it. Okay, so the temple construction, there is also a very defined temple construction team. There is always an acharya, like your Sarveshji, who will give you advice and guidance on what to do. And then you have a team which has a Sthapati, who's basically the supervisor, and he's also the expert draftsman who knows how to draw the layout, and he also tells each worker what to do. There is a Shilpin, there is a Sutragrahin, Takshaka, Vardakin, so on. There are many people who are involved in the temple construction team, and the book also defines who should be in this team and what roles each one of those should play, so that the temple gets constructed right. Why am I saying all this? If there was no process and no structure to building it, you would not see the kind of temples like one of you just mentioned. You would not see the Sri Rangam type of temple really getting constructed. There is a lot of thought, and there is a lot of rigor that goes into building these temples. So this is a very typical temple layout of a South Indian temple. We'll start from the bottom where you see the number 16. That's where so here they say the ladder to mount the Ther. What is the Ther? Ther is basically a Tamil word for chariot, Ratha. This is basically the Ratha which is used for, Utsavas. Whenever there is a temple festival, there is a temporary deity who's brought out and placed on this, and he's made to roam around all over the village, and he comes back, and there are dance programs and several other rituals that happen. From number 6, you see the Gopuram or the entrance. And then you come in at 5, you see the Bali Peetham. Bali Peetham is actually a pedestal kind of structure on which offerings are placed for the deity. 4, you see Dvajastambam. Dvajastambam is basically the flag pole. Dvaja is flag. Stambam is obviously a pillar on which the flag is raised. And then you have, this is a Shiva temple. So at 3, you'll have the Nandi, who's facing the Shiva Lingam, which you can see within in the square marked 1. And then 2, you have a Mandapa. Mandapa is a kind of a larger hall in which devotees can assemble, right? So there is also sub-deities. For example, in 9, you see Parvati. Because it's a Shiva temple, you'll always have an abode for Parvati. Outside, you also have abodes for other gods. You can have Subramanya, you can have what you see here is Pillayar. Pillayar is another name for Ganesha in Tamil. At number 12, you see a tank or a kulam. Typically, a South Indian temple will always have a temple tank which is filled with water. There is a requirement of a water body also being there. There are other entrances. Some temples have in all 4 directions, some have in 2 directions, some have in 3 directions. So it depends on the temple and depends on what they thought through when they were constructing this temple. Not only is the temple, so here is a little bit more complicated topic, but just listen through this. Not only is the temple constructed with these rules, there are also specific geometric designs called mandalas made, because these mandalas have the ability to channel the energy and bring the deity into the Vigraha itself. The mandalas are, on the ground plan of the temple, and also they are on the vertical plan of the temple, where the deity itself becomes the structure of the temple. So here you're seeing on the right-hand side Shiva, on the left-hand side you see a temple. Every element of his body corresponds with the structure of the temple, right? Where his feet is, you see something called Upapitam. Where his leg is, you see something called Adhishtanam. Where his knee is, you see Padavargam. And so on and so forth, until at the face, you see something called an Alpanasi and a Mahanasi. And where his head starts coming, the Shikharam starts and ends with the tip of his crown with Stupi. Right? So the temple is actually, by structure itself, designed on the deity which is inside the temple. Not only that, the ground plan is also as per the chakras of the deity. Where his feet is the Gopuram, and where his head is the Vimanam. In between, you have, you know, in the body, I don't know if Sarveshji has covered the chakras within the body, but there are supposed to be 7 chakras within the body, and each of these chakras align with one element of the temple. So not only is the temple you know, built on rigid principles, the temple itself is the body of God. Good. So now we have done some amount of theory. Let's move into something more exciting and actually get into the pictures portion of it. While we get into the pictures portion, we'll first start with the Pallava dynasty. You know, Pallavas are one of my favorite dynasties because they didn't rule for long, but they left behind some amazing temples for us to see. The origin of the Pallavas, you know, nobody knows. It's a lot of our ancient kingdoms. We don't know where they came from, but they came. They ruled over the territory called Tondai Mandalam. Tondai Mandalam is a region in the northern part of Tamil Nadu, northern to mid part of Tamil Nadu. Tondai actually is ivy gourd. सर्वेश जी आईवी गोड क्या होता है हिंदी में?
Ivy gourd.
Kundru, yeah. So it's basically Kundru. So the region, why it is called Tondai Mandalam is because it is assumed that the first Pallava floated on the sea and reached the shore, and around his neck or body was a Kundruka creeper. So they called it Tondai Mandalam. There are always some, you know, local stories that are associated with each of these kings. They were mentioned in the Samudragupta's Allahabad pillar, they are mentioned. So that means, you know, they were definitely around by the 3rd century CE. And they ruled for about 6 centuries. You know, the key, I have made some names in bold. Those were some of the key kings, and it is their temples that we will see. Mahendra Varman, Narasimha Varman, Parameshwara Varman, and Rajasimha. These are the 4 kings who were really the great kings. There was another king called Nandivarma II, who was also another great king, but I'm not going to go through a temple of his in the interest of time. So there is a book, there is an author called Kalki, who actually wrote a kind of a historical fiction on the Chola kingdom. And in that book, he actually captures a conversation. Obviously, you know, it's a fictitious conversation, but one can almost imagine this kind of a conversation where there is a character called Parthibendra Pallava, who's obviously from the Pallava dynasty, and there is Aditya Karikalan, who's from the Chola dynasty. So they're standing in the balcony one day in Kanchipuram, and Parthibendra Pallava is in a very sad mood. You know, he's saying, my kings, instead of, you know, expanding their kingdom and looking for more riches, they spent their time building these buildings. To which Aditya Karikalan actually replies, kingdoms attain great prosperity. You can get all the wealth you want, but they will disappear without a trace. But these architectural masterpieces that Mahendra Varma and Mamalla is another name for Narasimha Varma created will remind people of their greatness for thousands of years. Kings always had this thought in mind. Everybody talks about leaving a legacy, and kings always wanted to leave behind a legacy. Mahendra and Mamalla left it in the form of temples. So how did they start? What I'm showing you is actually a temple. It is a rock cut temple. It is the oldest stone temple in Tamil Nadu. It was built 1400 years ago. It's in a place called Mandagapattu. It was built by Mahendravarma Pallava. So 1400 years ago, right? I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of the temples are mentioned in Mahabharata and Ramayana and all that. How could this really be the oldest temple in Tamil Nadu? After all, Rama came to Tamil Nadu quite some time back. He must have visited something, right? So temples before this temple was constructed were built from brick and wood. What happens to brick and wood over time? You see so many buildings in your own cities which are run down, dilapidated, fall down. Bricks and timber have a tendency of being of limited time frame because they crumble, they lose their firmness. So Mahendravarman, who called himself Vichitra Chitta or curious minded, he actually built this temple, and he also makes an inscription in the temple where he says, I, Mahendravarman, proudly declare that perishable materials such as brick, timber, etc. will be discarded in favor of rock. And from that day, they start building temples out of stone because stones have a lasting durability. So he builds this temple. This is the first stone temple, oldest stone temple in Tamil Nadu. Then he goes some distance away in Mamandur and starts building some more temples. There are 3 or 4 rock cut temples there. You can see bottom 2 are very similar to what I showed you earlier. But the one on the right is getting ambitious. Why is it getting ambitious? All these temples are straight cut, they just go into the rock. But here he starts going around the rock as well. He starts building a temple where there can be a corridor, there can be cells. So he's slowly getting the idea of, why am I just going inside? Why can't I just go around the rock and build another structure? A few kilometers away, you have Dalavanur, where, the part where I marked in the circle is actually the temple. It's actually a field there now. It's a living temple. Shiva is there within and people still pray to it. But it's actually a field there. You don't even have a road to get there. But this is the temple. Now, you see, in the previous temples, you just saw solid rock, right? Now they've started sculpting some elements on the rock. Now it's getting a little more architecturally ornate. There are more elements coming in. Inside you have a linga of Shiva. It is still worshipped today. It's a very peaceful place. When you go there and you take a look at it, it's in the field. There's not a soul around. You can sit inside for as long as you want. He's also left some inscriptions that you can read. So he starts with the rock cut temples, and then they kind of move to Mahabalipuram. Mahabalipuram is a few kilometers outside of Chennai. It was a seaport and a very well-renowned seaport. In fact, a lot of European travelers came. They have also written about Mahabalipuram. A lot of Chinese travelers have written about Mahabalipuram. Mahabalipuram, they go and they start constructing a lot of things. Initially, they start with rock-cut temples, and then they move on to what is called a monolith. What is a monolith? Here, what we have seen is they cut into the rock and build a temple. There, they find a rock that is suitable enough to be carved completely into a temple. That's a monolith, a building built out of a single stone. And then they go on. Then they go on to this and say, I'm cutting into rock. Now I've managed to carve a single rock into a temple. Why can't I make blocks of rocks and then make a different, a Lego type structural temple? So they evolve into structural temples. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at some of the rock cut temples, some of the relief, one rock cut temple, one relief, some of the monoliths, and a structural temple in Mahabalipuram. So the first one is the Varaha Mandapam. Now you see, this is also a rock cut temple, but it's more structured. Pillars have appeared. The pillars actually have lions. There are even reliefs carved at the walls of the building, the temple. And it's a lot more structured. This was built by Narasimhavarma Pallava. He probably built it after a victory because the deities carved on the walls inside are very, very victorious deities. You have Varaha. He's bringing Bhudevi out of the ocean, and he's stepping on Adisesha's head and kind of lunging out of the ocean with her on his, holding her up. On the right, you have Trivikrama. Trivikrama is basically Vamana expanding himself into measure the whole worlds. His foot is on the earth. Around his navel to the left, you will see a deity which is flying with a disc around him. That's actually the sun, which actually shows, his body has reached the level of the skies and his head has gone off into the heavens, into Antariksha. And his foot is going right up there, and you have Brahma actually worshipping the foot. You all know what happens after this. Third foot he puts on Bali's head and basically completes the purpose of the avatar. You also have two more reliefs. One is of Lakshmi Devi. She's flanked by some attendants who are bringing her a Naivedya and other things, and you have two elephants actually pouring water on her. If you see, one of the elephants has its trunk up and water is being poured down. On the right, you see Durga, a standing Durga. Her lion is on top, and you see two devotees at her feet. So now the temple has structure. We've also started carving stuff on the walls of the temples. Now let's take a look at a more elaborate carving which you can see in Mahabalipuram. On the top left, you'll see some goats actually standing on top of the whole structure. So that kind of tells you how big this structure is. The goats are so tiny. This is a very interesting relief because there are two different stories actually depicted in this relief. In the center, you actually see a person who is meditating, and to his left, you see a deity standing with holding, something like an arrow in his, a very huge arrow or a missile in his hand. This could be representation of two stories. One is, it could be Arjuna's penance, where Shiva has come down to give him the Pashupatastra, or it could be Bhagiratha who's actually praying to him, and in between the two rocks, you see a kind of a natural structure in which a few snakes are actually coming down. That is the descent of Ganga. So it may as well be Ganga coming down, where Bhagiratha has prayed to Shiva and she descends from the heavens. So this is actually alternatively called Arjuna's penance or the descent of Ganga. You also see wildlife portrayed, a lot of rishis, kinnaras, gandharvas, kimpurushas, a lot of celestial beings floating around in the structure. Bottom, you also see a temple in which people are sitting and praying, and there is actually a rishi kind of structure shown who's actually teaching his disciples. So a lot is going on in this relief. So we've seen reliefs. Now let us go and see some of the monolith structures that they built. This temple complex is very, very unique. Each temple is in a different format or style, and this is called the Pancharathas. It is dedicated to the Pandavas actually. To the left, where you have a hut kind of structure, is Draupadi Ratha, and all the way at the back is Dharmaraja Ratha. So you have Draupadi Ratha, next to it is Arjuna Ratha, then you have kind of a large wagon type structure. Obviously it has to be Bhima Ratha because he was the biggest of them all. And then behind it is the Dharmaraja Ratha. On the side you have a Nakula Sahadeva Ratha. Next to it is an elephant. That is to kind of indicate that the structure of this temple has been shaped in the form of the back of an elephant. So this is very, very detailedly carved. This is from the other side now. This is the Dharmaraja Ratha. Now you can see the Dharmaraja Ratha is so detailed. It's actually multi-tiered. Unfortunately, it's not completed. They stopped it in between. But they also have so you guys are Americans. So they have the first floor on the bottom, second floor, and they also have a third floor, right? So they have 3 floors in this temple. Each of the floors was supposed to have a shrine. Unfortunately, they didn't complete it. But I spoke to you about mandala structure. See the bottom left figure which is shown. See how perfect the mandala has been created for this particular temple. So now we are beginning to implement a lot of the techniques that we saw in the texts. So what did we progress from? We cut rocks, we built temples. Then, we started carving reliefs on their walls. Then we said, let's go to monoliths, find a single large stone. Each of these temples now is a single stone, and make temples out of them. And then we said, let's go and create temples by bringing together blocks of stone and making a full structure. This is the Shore Temple at Mahabalipuram. It's a very famous temple. Percy Brown called it a landmark by day and a beacon by night. In fact, European travelers who came to Mahabalipuram used to call it the 7 pagodas. For them, pagoda was a temple. So right now, only 2 are visible. There were perhaps more. Unfortunately, they don't exist anymore. But these would have been some of the pagodas. It's right next to the seashore, so you can actually see it from the sea. This is how it looks. It's actually 3 different temples. In the front, you have 1 temple. In the back, you have a larger temple. And in between them, there is another temple, which is very, very small. The Shore Temple is very famous. It's a landmark temple because it's one of the best examples of early structural temples where rocks are brought together, joined, and a full temple structure is created. Right? I spoke to you about Bali Pitha. This is the Bali Pitha. These are the pedestals on which offerings are given. And then this is the view to the smaller temple. So whatever temples I have shown you are temples of, which are not living. No puja is done today except 1 temple. The Dalavanur temple I told you was where puja was done, where you saw the Shivalinga with, bhasma on it, clearly put on it and a cloth wrapped around it. So obviously that's somewhere where puja is done. But this is one of the landmark temples of the Pallavas. This is the Kanchi Kailasanathar temple. This temple inspired several kingdoms which came later to construct their temples. The Chalukyas were inspired by it. The Cholas were inspired by it. A lot of them tried to copy it. So this temple is very, very unique because it's the oldest temple in Kanchipuram. It's still functioning. You have a wonderful Shivalingam there which you can go and pray to. And Rajasimha himself has etched many inscriptions on its walls. So he was obviously very proud of this temple. And he wanted to declare to the world that I've built a fantastic temple. He says, Harasya Harahasa Rupam Atimanam Atyadbhutam. The bewitching smile of Shiva, most proud, most extraordinary. In fact, every sculpture that you see in this temple, small or large, Shiva is always shown with a very wonderful smile on his face. Once having praised his own creation, Rajasimha actually tries to bring the Lord there. He says, Shaile Kailasha Leelam Apaharati. Oh Lord, this temple actually abducts the divine play of Kailasha itself. And every possible story of Shiva and his Leelas are captured in this temple. The Vimana itself looks like, Kailasha, on which Shiva himself can sit. And finally, he closes it with, once he's sure that Shiva is going to come and reside, he says, Shri Rajasimha Pallaveshware, Nagendra Bhoga Bhima Bhushana, Deva Surendra Vrinda Vandita, Sthane Sthitostu Shankaraschiram. The temple was also called Rajasimha Pallaveshwara because Rajasimha built it. He says, in Rajasimha Pallaveshwara, with serpents around your neck, worshipped by Indras and the Devas, O Shankara, forever reside in my temple. So this is a layout of the temple. What you see on the here is where the linga is. Are you able to see my mouse?
Yes, we can see.
Yeah,
Prashant.
okay. So
Yes, we can.
here is where the linga is, and you also see a corridor here around it. Then you have 10 sort of smaller shrines attached to it, a mandapa, another mandapa. This is the entrance, the gopura which comes in. And then you see there is a garland of shrines. There are about 60 shrines here with various depictions of Shiva. And also 8 shrines outside. This was built by Rajasimha's wife, Rangapataka. Her name was Rangapataka. She built it. You have amazing depictions on the walls. This is a dancing Shiva. This is very typical of Pallavas. They always represented their Shiva dancing like this. What the Cholas represented as Nataraja, which I will show you later. What I will show you later. And here you can see on the bottom, you can see Ganas dancing. You have Ganesha here. And this is just one of the niches in the wall. This is called a Sandhya Tandava representation, or a Tandava which is happening in the evening. Then you have Lingodbhava, which is basically Shiva emerging as from the pillar of fire. There is a story where Brahma and Vishnu, who you can see here, this is Brahma here, this is Vishnu here, both of them debate as to who's the greater god. And suddenly a huge pillar of fire appears. Vishnu takes the form of a boar and says, I will go down and take a look as to where this pillar ends. And and Brahma says, I'll become a swan and fly up and see where the pillar ends. Both of them go and search and search and search for many hours or days or years. They don't find it. They come back. The pillar is actually Shiva, and he finally emerges from it. On the right, you see Dakshinamurti, who is a guru form of Shiva, the Adi Guru, the one who teaches the essence of the Vedas to the rishis. You can see he's actually sitting in a forest kind of setting. Even the lions are smiling. You have antelopes beneath him. There's an elephant. There are birds. There are monkeys. So many things are represented in this single sculpture. Then you have Bhikshatana. I will ask Sarvesh ji to at some point take you through some of these stories of the Puranas. In the interest of time, I'll kind of keep moving. This form is called Bhikshatana. This is Shiva dancing again in a form called Urdhva Tandava. Urdhva Tandava is basically him lifting his leg all the way up. There are multiple stories with it. It is said that he and Kali actually had a dancing competition and his earring fell off. So in his dance routine, he picked up the earring and took it up and fixed it in his ear with his leg. And Kali said, I can't dance like this, you've won. And that's how the competition was decided. Pallavas had a poet called Bharavi who lived during their time. He wrote a great Sanskrit play called, or a book called Kirata Arjuniyam. It was about the fight between Shiva and Arjuna at the time when Arjuna actually wanted to obtain the Pashupatastra from Shiva. Here you see Shiva as the hunter, Arjuna standing there with his bow up, and you see a boar right here because they fight for the boar, and whoever kills the boar wins, and then they have a fight later on, and so on and so forth. And here you have Narasimha moving with great force towards Hiranyakashipu. He's held his hand. Hiranyakashipu has raised his hand with the sword. Narasimha has actually held his hand, and his own hand is coming up to strike Hiranyakashipu. Then you have Kalantaka. This is a story where Shiva actually gets angry with Yama. Then you have a form of Durga. So what I'm showing you is about 5% of what is there in the temple. There are so many things in this temple that you can see. And every time you go, you will discover something new. It's a fantastic temple. It's a beautiful temple. And it kind of became the landmark temple of those times for other kingdoms to come, learn, and adapt from it.
I'm
So
sorry,
now,
but what's the name of the temple?
Kailasanatha temple. Kailasanatha. The Lord of Kailasha. So now that we have seen the Pallavas, and if you thought Pallavas were great temple builders, wait till you see what the Cholas did. Because the Cholas were perhaps the greatest kingdom to rule in the south of India. Not only were they great rulers, administrators, they also expanded their empires and went to Southeast Asia, as you can see. You know, this was at the peak of their reign. This was during Rajendra Chola's time. This is their kingdom. These are the vassals where they had developed influence, you know, all the way to Malaysia and so on. They were the longest ruling kingdoms, one of the longest ruling kingdoms of India. They are mentioned in the rock edicts of Ashoka. So Ashoka ruled in the 3rd century BC. So they're at least that old. They were not always a major kingdom. They waxed and waned. But by the time they reached the medieval Cholas, this period, they became a very prominent power in the south. And it is, you know, I have blocked out some of the names. And these names I have blocked out for a purpose because it is their temples that you will see today. And these were two of the greatest kings of the Cholas, Rajaraja and Rajendra. And Rajaraja of the later Cholas also built some fantastic temples. We'll see one of them. So not only did they build temples, they also kind of developed administration mechanisms with the temples as the center of administration. What I want to do is, and bear with me here, kids, because I'm facing a problem with that particular video, but let's see if it plays out. If it plays out, then all and good. Let me share that video with you. This is a video that when I visited this temple, I kind of took a periscope video. So I'll tell you upfront, the quality is not great because I was using mobile data and I could only put up as best as I could. But this will be a walkthrough from outside of the temple all the way to inside of the temple. I hope the video plays. This is the only video with which I have a problem, but let's see, you know, how it plays out. Right. So, are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
So, this is from outside. I'm just following a footprint. Right. So a lot of visitors come to this temple. Many come to pray, but most come to just come and stand and in awe of what was constructed. There you go. That's the first Gopuram is called the Keralantaka Gopuram. Rajaraja, when he built this temple, he had already defeated the Keralas. Antaka means, you know, Antaka actually means Yama. Okay, so, right. I'm facing a problem. Let's restart this. So, can you see it? Can you see the expanded screen, or are you seeing the...
No, we can see.
Okay, fine. So we're going through the Keralantaka Gopura. Because they defeated the Keralas, he called it, you know, a Keralantaka Gopura, where he proclaims himself as the end of Keralas. Then you have Rajaraja Tiruvasar, which is a Gopura named in his own name, which is coming up now. Look at the scale and the size of it. Just walking through the Gopurams and towards the temple itself is a fascinating experience. You're seeing so many things here. The Gopuras themselves are very ornate. They're so huge in structure. but they're hardly anything compared to what you're going to see as you move inside. That's how the video plays out. Just watch through. You can see two Dwarapalakas on either side. In the front there, you're seeing a fairly large Nandi coming up.
Bharatji, some children are asking, which city is this in?
Tanjore. This is in Tanjore or Tanjore. And there behind you see the Brihadishwara temple. It is one of the, so you've all seen Gopuras that go up. This is one of the temples where the Vimana itself is simply towering above. The Vimana is 220 feet tall. It's simply an awe-inspiring experience just to go to this temple and see what the Cholas constructed here. I think the video will kind of come to an end when you see the full scale of the temple. So that's the temple there for you. I'll go back to the slides where you will see better quality pictures of it. Let me.
Can you spell what city it's in? Like, spell it?
Go ahead. I couldn't get your question. Can you repeat that?
Can you spell the city's name?
It's Tanjore. Tanjavur. Tanjavur.
I have put that in the chat. Take a look at the chat.
Okay. So, can you see my screen now?
Thank you.
Yes, Bharatji.
So this is the Brihadishwara temple. As I told you, the Vimana is 220 feet tall. It is built of granite. Granite is a bloody heavy rock to work with. And this was built in, we are in 2020, this was built in 1010, 1010 years old temple. In fact, in 2010 or 2010, we actually celebrated the 1000th year of this temple. So it is that old. Inside there is a 29 feet Shivalinga, very large Shivalinga. The Vimana is actually hollow inside. It has 16 stories. The top, the kind of inverted bowl, the stupi that you see here, itself weighs about 25 to perhaps 30 to 35 tons. That is 30 to 35,000 kgs, which would be roughly 70,000 pounds or higher than that. So we are talking 1,000 years ago, and they built this temple 1,000 years ago. There are not many records to say how they built that temple, because the bowl that you see here right on top is actually a separate rock, which means they built it and nobody knows how they raised it. There are multiple theories to it. Some theories say that about 1.5 kilometers or nearly a mile away, they started building a ramp that came all the way up to here. And they actually got elephants to pull this giant block and place it on top. It's a fascinating temple, and if you ever go, you should visit it. If you look on the other side, you see the two Gopurams. This is the Keralantaka Gopuram, and this is the Rajaraja Tiruvasal. You see a Nandi here, quite a large Nandi. You can see, when you see the people standing there, you realize how huge this structure is. There's a better picture of the Gopurams or the entrances. You also see a Dwarapalaka, a guardian deity. The guardian deity itself is huge. You can see that he's actually holding a club here in his hand, because that's what he uses to protect. and you see a snake winding around the club, and the snake is actually eating a lion. This is eating an elephant. This is actually to show how huge this is. And here he's holding up his hand in a what is called Vismaya Mudra, or a gesture of astonishment. It's almost as if he's telling you, if you're surprised at looking at me, you have no idea what you have inside. And this is from the other side of the temple, the entire 220 feet of it. You can see people walking around. You can see the sheer scale, the size of the temple, and it's quite staggering to watch it. So obviously this temple required that the kingdom itself was rich enough to build such a huge temple. The number of people that would have been needed, the kind of thought process that would have gone into it. So the Cholas were a very rich kingdom. Not only were they rich, Rajaraja Chola kind of thought through how he wanted to administer his large empire, you know, and then he said, I can't be sitting somewhere in Tanjavur and trying to manage all these things. I need to create local structures and local government bodies which are able to administer that. And to administer that, why don't I start using the temples? So actually, to enable his local administration to happen, he kind of tied it to the temples. So he would, whenever he would tax the people, a large portion of the tax he would send back to the temple. And what the temple would do is give the money out to the local merchants, to the local farmers, so that they could buy raw material and start producing things. So it kind of became a circular system by which he would tax them, but he would send back the taxed amount to the temple, and the temple would decide what to do with that money. If you compare it with what the Mughals did, there is a huge contrast. Mughals collected tax in cash, and they didn't send anything back to the farmers who they taxed. In fact, most of the farmers couldn't even come to the city to sell whatever they produced. So a lot of poverty started building up. In contrast, the Cholas made sure that the money went back, and the money was not necessarily collected in cash. A portion of it was collected by the temple in kind. The temple needed to run its granaries to feed people. So they would take, whatever they invested back in rice or cloth or oil or gems, whatever was needed to run the temple came back in kind. So the farmer didn't have the necessity to go and, find a seller and sell it and then get something in return. Whatever he had to pay in terms of taxes, he would just give back to the temple in kind. So what the temples then started doing was also encourage a lot of industry to come up. In fact, Tanjavur has a very fantastic metal craft industry even today, where they make idols of Shiva and Vishnu in bronze or in panchalohas, which is 5 different metals combined together, and so on and so forth. And they still produce it. You can still go there and purchase it. Similarly, cotton, silk, all those kind of developed because the temples themselves were asking for that material. They were giving money for those things to be produced. So local industry kind of developed. Now we'll take a look at, his next in line, his son, his successor, Rajendra Chola. He was more ambitious than his father. He actually went ahead and did a lot more conquests. He was the one who actually went all the way to Southeast Asia, to Malaysia, and so on and so forth. He subdued all the local neighboring kingdoms and made them vassals. But he also marched to the north. He crossed Kalinga, which is Orissa, and he reached Bengal, where he defeated the Palas, and he actually reached the Ganga. He was so elated, so happy at having defeated the kings at the mouth of Ganga that he came back and built a new capital near Tanjavur, which he called Gangaikonda Cholapuram. Gangaikondan means the man who defeated the kings at Ganga, or the man who took over Ganga. So he built a temple called Gangaikonda Cholapuram, and he said, I'll build my own Brihadishwara temple. So he went ahead and built one more Brihadishwara temple. Again, a very large temple, not as large as his father's, because he somehow felt he should not exceed the size with which his father had built it. So he built a 180-foot temple, but it is way more ornate and lot more sculptures and lot more architectural elements are there. This is how it looks. The previous temple that you saw had very straight Vimana. This is kind of curved up. It has a huge Nandi also, similar to the previous temple. There are several elements of sculptures which come in. You can see Nataraja here, and you can also see what is called Chandesh Anugraha Murti. Before I go to that, I want to add an element of bhakti movement. There was a huge bhakti movement in the country, and it is estimated that this bhakti movement actually started in Tamil Nadu. In the Bhagavata Mahatmyam, one of the books, there is a verse which kind of says, I am bhakti. I was born in Dravida. Dravida is Tamil Nadu. Grew mature in Karnataka. Went here and there in Maharashtra. Then in Gujarat, I became old and worn. But on reaching Vrindavan, I was renewed and I became lovely again. So there are traditions of bhakti here, Shaivism and Vaishnavism. There are several poet saints who wrote wonderful poems about gods and wonderful literature about gods. There were 63 Nayanmars in Shaivism and 12 Alvars in Shaivism. These are the names given to those collective saints. There were 4 who were prominent among the Nayanmars, and one of them has written a great poem, a very short but sweet poem about Nataraja himself. He says, raised eyebrows, beautiful red lips sporting a slight smile, wet locks of hair, fair body shining like a jewel, 1 foot lifted. And if you get to see all of these, your birth as a human being in this world is a blessed one. Right next to him is Chandesh Anugraha Murti. Chandesha was also one of the poet saints. It shows Shiva kind of blessing Chandesha. Some people also think this could have been Rajendra Chola himself, Shiva blessing Rajendra Chola. But, those are all local stories that you keep hearing. So,
one question many children are asking, where is this Gangai Kondacholapuram temple
about
and how far from?
It's about 30 kilometers from Tanjavur. 30 kilometers translate to about 20 miles.
Thank you, Bharatji.
Right, 20 miles from Tanjavur. So I said I will show you a third temple. So we saw the tallest one, then we saw the middle one. Now we're going to see the shortest one. This is only about 120 feet tall. This is called Airavateshwara temple. This was built by, if you remember the list of Chola kings I showed you Rajaraja II on the later Chola column. It was built by that king. It is, while these are huge in scale, if these are about architecture, this temple is pure art. It took 12 years to build. And it is one of the most beautiful temples you'll ever see. I'll show you another video where I again walk through to this temple, and you'll find it even more fascinating. And I think this video will definitely play. So let me just share. So sorry about the picture quality, but enjoy it. So I'm going into the Airavateshwara temple. To the left, you are seeing a kind of a caged structure in which something is there. I will talk to you about it. Those are actually stairs. I will tell you about those stairs a little bit later. So, a very peaceful temple. I went there like 6:30 or 7 a.m. in the morning. So there was hardly anybody there. The Nandi in front of the temple. There's a wall around, and there is the Dvajastamba, the flag post that I spoke to you about. We're entering through the Gopura. And there you have it. That's the temple. I'll move a little bit more to the side. You'll see left and right how it pans out. You can see there are lots of niches, and in those niches you see a lot of sculptures depicting various deities, the wall around. And this is kind of a mandapa, steps through which you go, and you can see it's like a chariot. You can see a horse and a wheel behind it. So the temple is actually in the form of a ratha, a chariot with a horse and a wheel, and you'll see a horse and a wheel on the other side, and that is the Vimana, right? It's a smaller temple, but it's very, very beautifully carved, and I'll show you some of the carvings for you to see. So that's how the temple pans out. It's again a Shiva temple with a linga inside, and it's a functioning temple. You can go and pray there. The three temples that I've shown you are also what is called the three great living Chola temples. In fact, it has been named so by UNESCO. UNESCO calls it the three great Chola, living Chola temples. And let me come back to sharing my slide. Right. So, can you see my screen? So yeah, this is how the temple looks from one side. This is how the temple looks from the other side. You can see the chariots. You have elephants that form the kind of stairs, the railings to the stairs. You see a lot of pillars. You can see here you can see a Naga kind of deity. This is actually sage Agastya here. On all of these walls, you have something or the other carved or some deity or the other shown. It took 12 years to build this temple. This is how the horse and the wheel of the chariot looks. Right? Very detailedly carved with a lot of design elements to it. You see pillars. Each pillar is like a shrine because there's a story here, there's a story here, there's a story here. Something is happening here. You will also realize that as you go to these temples, you'll begin to recognize who the deities are. This is actually Brahma because he's holding a kamandala in his hand and a prayer bead in his other hand. So I don't know what story this is, but this is a story. Like this, there are stories in every single pillar that you see depicting something or the other from the Puranas. What you see here, and in tiniest of niches, you'll find something or the other. This is actually Bhima crushing Hidimba as his sister Hidimba stands and looks on. Okay. This is actually Kamadeva shooting an arrow at Shiva. Shiva opens his third eye and destroys him, and you can see him lying down here. It's almost like a comic book with panels. And like this, there are hundreds and hundreds of stories from the Puranas sculpted on the walls of this temple. You also have some unique elements, like, a kind of multi-dimensional ones. This is a single body, but it could be three dancers, right? One leaning this way, one leaning the other way, and one with her legs up. Here you see, is this a bull or is this an elephant? You see the bull here with its hump, and you see the elephant here with its trunk. What is it? You don't know. So a lot of these kind of tidbits are also carved on the temple walls. It's very ornate. You have here a dancing form of Shiva with multiple faces. You have a very, very beautiful Durga here on top of a buffalo head, Mahisha's head. So this temple took 12 years to build, and it will take you probably 12 weeks to go through every element of this temple, because you see something or the other is carved here, something or the other is carved here. So it will take you that much time to explore this temple. So the three great living Chola temples. So if you ever come back to India on a trip, go to Tanjavur. These are all a few miles within each other. Tanjavur temple, the big temple that we saw in the beginning, is in Tanjavur town itself, which is a fairly large town. Gangaikonda Cholapuram is about 20 miles away, and this is about 3-4 miles away, this temple. All three are worth visiting for you to get a very good experience of how complex these temple structures are. I'll show you another video. And remember, I told you to think of the stairs that were blocked by a railing at the very beginning. Now, listen to this. This is one of the attendants in the temple. This is a normal sculpture, and this is another sculpture here. Both are made of stone, not of metal or anything. They're both made of stone. Listen to what happens when it taps on them. So the sculpture itself produces sound. The stairs, which were blocked by a cage, it is said that each one, there are 7 steps there. Each one actually is in one of the swaras. Sa, re, ga, ma, pa, dha, ni, sa. So each one of the steps, and they're all stone steps, they actually found stones that had a musical element to them, and they used it to kind of sculpt these things, these idols from such stones, so that you even have musical vigrahas. Many of the South Indian temples have musical pillars. Each pillar will create a different sound. And, you know, as I told you, 35 to 40,000 temples in Tamil Nadu, right? And few hundreds, if not thousands of 1,000-year-old temples. There is a lot of temples to see in Tamil Nadu. So what I have shown you now is 2 elements. One is I told you how temples came into being. Then I told you how the structure of the temples started. Then I told you how Cholas built temples and how they used it to even administer local villages and so on. Now we will move to the last element of temples, which is actually about temple festivals.